Now, this is only the second time I have used any of this contraption. Josh and I played with it a little bit last night, so I think I got the hang of it here. So this morning I want to consider our God. The title is "How Awesome Is Our God," and so we're gonna talk a little bit about physics, and we're gonna talk about astronomy. That's why I didn't want you saying too much in your thing there. See, didn't want you stealing my thunder. So, and we're just gonna look at what makes our God so awesome. Okay, I mean, I think you can all agree with me there. Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. So we're going to take a look at the firmament. We're going to take a look at what's out there and see just what makes God so awesome. Hey, look, it worked. Okay, I have a degree in science. I majored in chemistry and I minored in geology. And I've always been fascinated with how this ball works. Okay. Does anybody here remember the TV show, The Big Blue Marble? Anybody remember that? And it was, when it would come on the screen, it was the Earth, like you were looking at it from the moon, and then it was all about the Earth, all about things that happen on the Earth and why they happen and what they do. In my life, science has confirmed and strengthened my belief in God. And I don't think you can separate belief in God and science because I think they mutually work together and help explain each other. Does anybody here have a human hero? Anybody here got somebody that they really look up to as a human being? Nobody? Okay, you guys do. Okay. So I'm going to tell you, I have two. I have two people that I look up to. Roger DeCoster. I don't know does anybody know who he is? Anybody here? Raise your hand if you know who he is. Nobody? Yeah, Jerry would know. So Roger DeCoster was 500cc motocross world champion. Okay. 71, 72, 73, 75, and 76. He was a very articulate, it still is, because he's still managing teams. Okay. Was always been a good sportsman or a good spokesman for the sport. If you are into motocross, okay, he is the man. Everybody talks about him. When you say the man, everybody knows who you're talking about. You're talking about Roger DeCoster. Okay. My other hero is Albert Einstein. Yeah. Theoretical physicist. He has hundreds of quotes. Okay. I don't know if you've ever read any of them or anything. So I brought three of my favorites here this morning. First one is, two things are infinite, universe and human stupidity, and I'm not sure about the universe. Okay, that's what Einstein says. And if you've read anything about Einstein, I read everything I can about him to understand who he was and what he was and all that. And it would make you chuckle. Okay, you guys laughed because it's out there, but this next one I think you'll get a kick out of too. An hour with a pretty girl seems like a minute. A minute sitting on a hot stove burner seems like an hour. That's relativity, he says. Okay, that defines what relativity is. Now this last one I want to pick because it flows with the sermon today. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Okay, and I think you have to understand that Einstein, he had a strange belief in God, okay, but Einstein also said he was not an atheist, okay, so he had kind of a strange belief in God. So here we have. Let's take a look at before we go here. Science, as we know it today, believes in what's called macroevolution. Okay, you know what that is? Macroevolution takes very long periods of time, and species change from one to another like that, which brings about questionable ideas of origins, right? As Christians and as creationists, we believe in microevolution, which is very short time spans, changes within a species as they adapt to their environment. And I think God built that into everything he created, the ability to adapt. Okay? And that adaptability is a good thing. Okay? Just think about what's on the earth today and how things have had to adapt. Plants and animals and people, everybody's had to adapt. So now let's take a look at our awesome God. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And then God said, let there be light. So I want to take a look at, for a little while here, I want to take a look at light. Does anybody know how fast light travels? Huh? Real fast. Yeah, real fast. Does anybody know the actual speed? Okay. 186,000 miles per second. Okay. That's what it is. That's the speed of God's light. Okay. Let's take a look at, I want to keep going here. So let's look at the Earth. The Earth's diameter is 7,926 miles, give or take, okay, because there's mountains and valleys and all that kind of stuff. So its circumference, which is outside, okay, the outside around, is 24,901, give or take, okay, a few miles there. So if I have this little flashlight here. John, can you shut the light off for a minute? I have this flashlight here, and I want to show you something. Okay, so that's about a second. Okay, can everybody see that? That's about a second. Okay, John, turn the lights back on. So at 186,000 miles per second, okay, if I could train the beam of light coming off of here to follow the circumference of the Earth, okay, about 6 feet off the ground, it would circle the Earth 7.5 times in that first second. Is that amazing? Is that amazing or what? Just this, that right there. If I could train that beam of light to follow the curvature of the Earth, in 1 second, it would circle the Earth 7.5 times. Okay, so if that's kind of making you go, ooh, okay, you take 186,000 miles divided by the circumference of the Earth, okay, and that gives you the amount of time it takes to go around the Earth, 7.5 times, okay. So that's a whoa, right? I mean, there was a few of you. Now there's some of you that are, didn't really react to that, but that's a whoa, right? I mean, it really is to think that little 1 second burst of light would have circled the Earth 7.5 times. And let's talk about our sun. Our sun is 93 million miles from Earth. You could fit 1.3 million Earths inside of our sun. Now let that one sink in. Okay, that's another whoa, right? 1.3 million Earths could fit inside of our sun. The core is a helium nuclear reaction at 20 million degrees Fahrenheit. And a helium nuclear reaction, its byproduct is hydrogen. So the mantle and the crust of the sun are a hydrogen nuclear reaction at over 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? At 186,000 miles per second, it takes the light and heat that we feel on our shoulders in the summertime. It takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds for that light to get here from the sun. Is God awesome or what? I mean, just think about that. Just think about that ball out there, and it's doing its thing. Okay, science says, well, in about 6 billion years, it's going to burn out. Well, I don't know about that. Because if God made it, why would it burn out? Okay. Okay, yeah, no, let's just be careful, Leroy. Okay, all right, just be careful here. Okay, just take my lead. When I ask a question, answer it, but just don't be sticking stuff in there. Okay. And God put the earth at just the right distance from the sun, okay, and just the right size to support life and liquid water. Okay, we are one of the Goldilocks planets of our galaxy. They haven't been able to find very many others that they can conjecture that could support life like our Earth can. Okay, so that's our sun. So light, the speed of light, travels 186,000 miles in the first second. Okay, now watch this. In the first minute, it goes 11,160,000 miles in a minute. Okay? In an hour, 669,600,000 miles it travels in an hour. Just keep thinking about this. It's going to get weirder yet. Okay? In a day, 16 billion miles light travels at 186,000 miles per second. Is God awesome or what? And God created that. Okay? In a week, 112,492,000,000 miles light would travel in a week. But just think about that. That's like, whoa. That's a long ways, right? How about a month? 449,971,200,000 miles light travels in a month. Okay, now, watch this one. In a year, light travels 5.88 trillion miles. 5.88 trillion miles. This is called a light year. Okay, I'm sure you've heard that before. Okay, this is a light year, and this is the smallest. This is the smallest increment that astronomy uses to measure our cosmos. That's the smallest. Okay, the yardstick, the inch, the foot, the mile, the kilometer means nothing. Means nothing. The smallest increment that they measure with is called a light year. It's 5.88 trillion miles. That's a long ways. Let me ask you this question. And I've asked this question of a lot of people, and people tend to get kind of nervous when I ask this question, okay? Is the universe infinite? Well, I'm not, I consider it, my answer is yes. That's what I believe. I believe that the universe is infinite because in my own thinking, and those of you who know me know that, my thinking can be a little twisted at times, okay? But in my own thinking, if the universe has boundaries, okay, then we got to go looking for somebody that God reports to, right? If the universe has got boundaries on it, then we have to go looking for somebody that God reports to. But if the universe is infinite, then God's in charge of all that. And God has created all of that. And that's the hard part for many, because, I'll admit, we can't really wrap our heads around infinity, okay? Because what is infinity? Infinity goes as far that way as it does that way. And it goes as far that way as it does that way. And it goes as far that way as it does that way. And those lines never intersect, right? So you just got to think, oh, wait a minute. On and on and on and on and on and on and on, and then you haven't even, it's not even spit in the bucket yet, right? The universe is infinite. So here's a question that I ask myself. And again, I don't know the answer to it. I'm just getting it out here because I want you to try to think about this. I mean, this is about how awesome our God is. Okay? God created all of this. Okay? So if the universe is infinite, okay, and light travels at 186,000 miles per second, then there may exist portions of the universe that haven't seen light yet. Fathom that one. try to make that work in your thinking. Okay? Because I have I have thought about that for a while. And it's like, whoa, man, that's like can't even get there from here, you know. Now we've talked about, you know, these long distances here. I'd like to maybe put these very long distances into another context that might be easier to understand. So let's look at these huge numbers in terms of time. Speed of light through the universe, we've already talked about that. Okay. Time by seconds. Okay. So we know that 1,000 thousands is a million, right? Those of you that understand math, you understand that. 1,000 thousands is a million. 1,000 millions is a billion. 1,000 billions is a trillion. 1,000 trillions is what? Anybody know? Quadrillion, okay. You know what comes after that? There you go. You get an A. So I'm going to try to put this. I'm going to try to put these huge distances into a context of time. Guess when 1,000,000 seconds ago was? You got a guess? You probably saw it because I went one frame ahead. I didn't mean to. Anybody got a guess when 1,000,000 seconds ago was? Okay. It was 12 days ago. So October 20th of this month was 1,000,000 seconds ago. Okay. Anybody got a guess for 1,000,000,000 seconds? Huh? 6 months. Okay, I hear that. Anybody else? 4 years. Okay. How about it? Anybody else? Come on. Be brave. Be brave. We got 6 months. We got 4 years. 1,000,000,000 seconds ago. Huh? Okay. Well, let's see what that was. 1,000,000,000 seconds ago was October 31st, 1994. It was 31 years and 1 day ago. That's 1,000,000,000 seconds ago. How about 1,000,000,000,000 seconds? Who wants to take a guess? Come on. Columbus took a chance. Huh? 31,000 years ago? Okay. Let's see what that says. 34,447 BC. That was 1,000,000,000,000 seconds ago. Okay. How about 1,000,000,000,000 seconds ago? Any guess? 34 million years ago. See, the math guys would have known, right? Because remember what I said? 1,000 thousands is a million, 1,000 millions is a billion. You know, it's just moves ahead 1,000 times. Okay. So 34,446,649 BC was 1,000,000,000 seconds ago. It's like, whoa. That's like, wow. What you know? So does that kind of puts these big numbers into perspective here. So let's take a look into the universe that God has created for us. On any night, I wish Nancy was here. She'd get a kick out of this. On any night that stars are visible, okay? 5 planets in our solar system are visible with the naked eye. It means you don't need a lens, you don't need anything to see them, okay? And those planets are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And if you've got a really good pair of binoculars, you can see the rings on Saturn with a really good pair of binoculars, okay? If you know where to look for them and at what time of night they're going to be in, you know, their position in the sky, you can find these 5 planets without using any kind of a lens to see them. Okay. Uranus and Neptune are too far away to see without assistance from a lens to magnify them, but they're still out there every night that you can see stars, as long as you know when and where to look for them. You know, you'll need some sort of a lens to see Uranus and Neptune. These are in our solar system, and this is our neighborhood. Okay, and this is what God created. I mean, you know, let's keep that in mind. God created all this, okay, and it's just awesome what He's done, what He provided for us. So in our little cul-de-sac here in the universe that God has made for us, in Genesis 1, on day 4, God put the lights in the night sky to divide the day from the night. They were also there to tell time and seasons, the count of days and the years. Now, I remember Mark and I having a conversation some years back about a thing he was looking into that he kind of studied a bit, and that was the gospel in the constellations. Remember that? Yeah, it's really cool. You know, it really is the way this stuff works out. But that's what God made for us. That's what God created. This is what our awesome God has done. Our solar system resides in the Milky Way galaxy. Everybody know that? Did everybody know that? Ours in the Milky Way galaxy, okay? The Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across. Okay? So all you have to do is accelerate up to 186,000 miles per second and keep that speed up for 100,000 years, and you'll make it from east to west in the galaxy. Okay? That's all you got to do to get up to that. The Milky Way galaxy is approximately 1,000 light years thick. So again, you got to accelerate up to 186,000 miles per second, and you got to spend 1,000 years at that speed to get through north to south on the Milky Way galaxy. The galaxy rotates at 220 kilometers per second. That's pretty fast. Okay. So much so, the Earth is located 26,000 light years from the center of our galaxy. Okay? Again, this is what God has created. This is what our awesome God has done. Science has estimated that it takes us 250 million years to complete one orbit around our galaxy. Just one orbit. That's like the Earth going around the sun. Okay? Our solar system takes 250 million years to complete one orbit around our galaxy. And that's what God has made. Is our God awesome? Would you have thought of any of this? You know, I mean, let's be honest. Would you have thought of any of this? But hang on now, because it's going to get cooler here. I'm not sure where I'm at. Got to see. Okay, yep, this is where we're going next. So with the exception of a few points of light being planets, all the rest of the points of light in the night sky mostly represent what astronomy calls stars, which are actually suns representing other solar systems. There are a few other planets, but mostly they're suns. So one of the largest that science has found is a sun called Canis Majoris. Okay. When you read that name, you kind of think, well, it sounds like the big dog, right? Canis Majoris, kind of like the big dog star. So it lives within the constellation of Canis Major. It's one of the largest known stars in our universe so far. It's 2,000 times larger than our sun. Okay. Approximately 75.5 billion Earths would fit inside of Canis Majoris. Yeah. It's approximately 3,800 light years away from Earth. So again, all you got to do is accelerate up to 186,000 miles per second and travel that speed at 3,800 years, and you get to Canis Majoris. Is our God awesome? Is our God awesome? I mean, really, think about these things. If it was placed at the center of our solar system, it would reach beyond Jupiter's orbital path. That's how big Canis Majoris is compared to our solar system. Okay? Is our God awesome or what? I mean, would you have thought of this? I mean, really? Does anybody here think they would have thought about this kind of stuff? I mean, this is what our God has done. Now, this is where it really gets funny, where it really gets good. I did some math, okay? I created a ratio of my height and mass to the height and mass of the Earth, okay? So you take the height and mass of the Earth and you divide it into my height and mass, and you get a fraction, okay? And it's a percentage, but it's a ratio, okay? Then I created a ratio between the mass and height of the Earth and the mass and the height of our sun. Did the same thing. Took the mass and height of the Earth, divided by the mass and height of the sun, and I got another fraction, which was a ratio, okay? Then I used those two proportions to determine how big I would be if I lived on a planet comparably sized to Canis Majoris as the Earth is to our sun. Okay, are you with me? Yeah. Okay, if I lived on a planet that was orbiting Canis Majoris and it was ratio-wise the same as the Earth to our sun, okay, I about fell down when I calculated all this. If I did my math correctly, it said that on that planet, I would be 188 feet tall, and I would weigh just over 56,000 pounds, or about 28 tons. Okay, so that's what I would look like on a planet that was comparably sized to Canis Majoris as our sun, as our planet is to our sun. Now think about that. Even if my math is off a little bit, it still makes sense, doesn't it? Right? It still makes sense. Our God is a God of variety, of indescribable capabilities to create beauty and size, distinctly and profoundly wonderful things that we can't even fathom. Turn in your Bibles with me to Isaiah. We're going to spend some time in Isaiah. Turn with me in your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 64. We're going to read essentially the same verse from the Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay, so Isaiah 64 verse 4 says, "For since the beginning of the world, men have not heard, nor have they perceived it with their ears, neither have their eyes seen, O God, except for you, what God has prepared for him that waits for God." Okay? Now, turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. I'm sure you all know this one. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 9. Are you there? 1 Corinthians 2, chapter 2, verse 9. "But as it is written," okay, as it is written, so that means it came from somewhere. "As it is written, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those that love him." I think Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, was quoting that verse from back there in Isaiah to them, and when he wrote this letter, saying, you haven't got a clue. You know, really, that's what it's saying. You haven't got a clue what God's got in store for you. God has such wonderful, amazing, indescribable things for his people that you haven't got a clue. You know, I play with model airplanes and you know, fly and build and design and all that kind of stuff, and I always come up with something different, something odd and all. You know, and I go to the flying field, nobody's got an airplane like mine because I don't copy anybody. You know, there's a faction of model airplanes called Scale, and where they try to recreate, you know, real airplanes, and I don't like to do that because I don't want to copy it. You know, I don't want this thing telling me what the wing's supposed to be shaped like and all that kind of stuff. But so And you know, so I got pretty good imagination. But these verses are telling me I haven't got a clue. I haven't got a clue what God has prepared, and like it says in Corinthians, in store for those that love him. So the question, one question comes up then, are we willing to hem God in? Are we willing to hem God in with our puny, finite thinking? To hem God in and to stifle his creativity? Because we do that. You know, we do that. We think we know. Let's look at the scriptures and let them tell us about the majesty and power of God. You know, do you ever get into a place where you need to get back to reality? You know, God needs to come down and say, look, you know, you need to, you know, you need to be put in your place. You need to understand who and what you are. You ever get in that? I get into that kind of place, and Isaiah is where I go. Book of Isaiah is where I go. So let's go to Isaiah, and we're going to be looking at mostly chapter 40. So 40. Turn to Isaiah chapter 40, and let's see what the prophet Isaiah has to tell us. Chapter 40, verse 12. And he's asking questions here, okay? And I've put them into questions here for each of you, okay? Which one of you has measured the waters of the earth in the hollow of your hand? Matthew, have you done that? Have you measured the earth waters in your hand? Which one of you has spread out the heavens in a span? Yeah. Which one of you have done it? John, have you done that? Have you been able to spread out the heavens in a span? Which one of you can count the dust of the earth in a measuring cup? Brianna, can you do that? You got a cup big enough? Cup big enough to measure that? Which one of you can weigh the mountains and the hills with a balance? Who's got a scale? Who's got a scale big enough to measure the mountains? To measure them in their weight. Verse 13. Which one of you has brought direction of spirit to the Lord? Anybody done that? Diana, can you do that? Can you take direction of spirit to the Lord? Which one of you has been his counselor to teach him? Brian, have you had to teach the Lord? I bet he's had to teach you. I bet he has. I bet he's had to teach you. Which one of you has God sought counsel from? Chuck? God come down and sat with you and said, Chuck, educate me. God has done that? He's come down and asked you to educate me? No, he's not. Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Just want to make sure. Which one of you instructed and taught God in the path of judgment? Anybody here done that? Ruth? No, I didn't think so. Which one of you has passed knowledge and understanding on to God? These are questions that Isaiah is asking his people. Verse 25. Who will you compare God to? Alexis, is there anybody you can compare God to? No, I don't think so. Who will you say that God looks like? Anybody? Can you tell what God looks like? Verse 26. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and behold, who has created the heavens, who has numbered the stars and called them all by name. Now, science tells us that within our own galaxy, there are about 2 billion solar systems. Okay? And then they say there's billions of galaxies in the universe. Does anybody here know the name of all of them? The names of the planets, the names of the moons, the names of the solar systems. Anybody here know that? Our God is awesome. Look at what He's created. If you just let your mind flow out and try to think about the universe, this is what God has created. This is how awesome our God is. And yet He can love sinners like you and me. And He was willing to pay the price of redemption to save His creation, to save us. When you think of all the information I brought here this morning, these vast distances and lengths of time, how massive some of the worlds, I've had some conversations. Mark was involved in one because I'm going to tell you what he said to me. And my family knows that, I'm into science fiction, man. I mean, I like Star Wars, I like Star Trek and all that. And I always say, to me, it seems it would be awful boring if throughout the universe, all the beings look like us. I think it would be awfully boring. And Mark, when I said that, Mark said, somebody's been watching too much Star Wars and too much Star Trek. Okay. And I accept that. I'm not, I didn't back away. I'm not ashamed of that. Okay. I still believe beyond every shadow of a doubt that God has beings in the universe that don't look like us. And I don't know what they look like. And I know I have been tainted. I know that. I know I've been tainted by science fiction stuff. But it just, as creative as God is, I mean, just look at a tiger lily flower one time. Have you ever done that? Have you ever just gotten right up close and looked inside? It's amazing. It's amazing the detail, and God is so oriented to that. He's so imaginative. And when I think about these massive worlds that are out there, okay, I know there's already one star that they found that's bigger than Canis Majoris. I can't remember what they called it. It's got some crazy numbers. They haven't given it a name yet, okay, but it's bigger than Canis Majoris, okay. And when I think of this, and I try to think of an infinite universe, it makes my head spin. I just go, oh wow. You just can't get a hold of that. You can't really get. But one thing that it does, especially when we need to be brought back to reality by God from time to time, this shrinking feeling. Okay? Because one of the things that I also wonder is, are there planetary systems that are smaller than us? If there's ones out there that are bigger, wouldn't it make sense that there's some out there that are smaller? It makes sense to me, but again, my thinking in that area is kind of tainted, okay, and I understand that, and I get it, but I still think there's got to be some out there that are smaller if there's some out there that are bigger, okay? But you get this shrinking feeling, okay, when you think of infinity and when you think of the universe and all that. And it's not a bad shrinking feeling, because one of the things that we tend to do as human beings is we tend to puff ourselves up. We tend to think we're pretty good. We tend to think that we got it figured out, and we get this rising feeling like we know what this is all about. And when we do that, we actually pull God down to our level. We start to do that. We start to pull God down to our level of life. And God has to step in from time to time. And I know all of you have felt this. You may not be willing to admit it, but we've all felt this. And at times God has to just get us back to normal, get us back to reality, okay? And yet, through all of that, God poured out all that heaven had to offer. You realize that? There was nothing more to offer to redeem us. There was nothing left to offer that heaven had, that heaven offered everything. So, would you like to see what God was willing to do? This is cool. This is what our God was willing to do to save us from our sins. Okay. That's a human zygote. That's what that's called. That's 16 cells. It's about 48 hours old. Okay. And it's resting on the point of a safety pin. Okay. You're starting to get a little scale here. Starting to see a little scale in all of this. So another question that I like to ask people is, okay, so conception happens, okay? The sperm finds the egg, it buries its head in the shell of the egg, the tail drops off, the head dissolves, bringing its half of the DNA sequence into, and then that cell divides the first time, okay? And the question I like to ask people is that a human being? And you can tell a lot about where people think by the way they answer that question, okay? So it divides 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. Here's a human zygote, 16 cells old, 500 times magnification in an electron microscope. So this is teeny tiny, okay? So the question I'm asking you this morning about this picture, this is what God was willing to do for us. Is that Jesus? Was that Jesus? At 48 hours old, after Mary conceived, and we had a 16-cell zygote, was that Jesus? Okay, and so it's a step of faith. It really is, because and it's not just that, it's taking a stand, right? This is taking a stand. Because what does the world tell us that is? It's just something, isn't it? The world tells us that that's just something. It's 16 cells, okay? And when people tell me that, I say, okay, so if I could reach in there and grab that zygote, get it between my thumb and forefinger and just grind it into nothing, would that upset God? See, and you can tell a lot about the way people think by the way they answer that question. Okay? Because what the world wants us to, not the whole world, but what the people who look at this and say that's not a human, what they want us to believe is that's just something. And you can get rid of that. Because at the same time, you can get rid of that when it's 1.2 trillion cells and it's a baby a week before delivery. And they'll still go in there and kill it. Okay, so the question is, when do you answer that question? This is what our God was willing to do for us. This is what Jesus became, right there. Jesus became a 16-cell zygote, and then continued dividing, okay, until there was an embryo, and then there was a fetus, and then he was a newborn, okay? But that is what Jesus looked like at 48 hours old as a human. And so, again, you ask that question, is that a human being? Because if that's not a human being, then Jesus was not a human being at that stage. Right? That's something that we have to wrestle with. This is how our God raises us from the grave. This is how our God restores us to his original design intent. What was Jesus' original design intent for the human race? Pardon? Got to speak up. Huh? Yeah. Jesus did, well, how were they going to be eternal? How were Adam and Eve And if nobody had sinned, how was mankind going to be eternal? Access to the tree of life. And that's what we don't have now, is it? We don't have access to the tree of life, so we are not eternal. But this is what our God was willing to do for us. By becoming one of us, by becoming a human zygote, by entering our world the same way that each of us have, our God lived as we were intended to live. Right? Jesus lived without sin. We were intended to live that way. When Adam and Eve were created, God's design intent was that they would be obedient and they would get their test. And when they passed their test, then they would be free of sin. Okay? And that's what our God was willing to do to us. He knows exactly what we go through. Jesus knows exactly what we go through because Jesus became that right there, and then became an embryo, and then he became a fetus, and then he was a newborn, and then he was raised by his mother, and Jesus knows exactly what you and I go through. That's why 1 Corinthians 10:13 is so important. Let's turn to that one. Can anybody quote that? 1 Corinthians 10:13. Speak up. You got to speak up if you're going to try. Chapter 10 and verse 13. Who can somebody? Okay, so here we go. We're going to read it. There has no temptation taken you but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above what you are able to bear, but will with this temptation also make a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. So there's an indictment, right? That's an indictment. It says that you could have been sinless. Because what the scriptures are telling us is that God would not have allowed you at any point in time in your life to be, and he still doesn't. You believe that? Is that still in force today for all of us? God will not allow us to be tempted. He won't allow us to be tempted beyond what we're able to bear. But that's what he did for us. He came down and lived the life we were designed to live. Turn to the book of Romans with me, to chapter 5. Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 10. For when we were yet without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, but peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But God commended his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, being now justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. For if when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more, being reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. So Jesus became that 16-cell zygote in order to do what Paul has just told us here in Romans. He did that for us. Our God, our awesome God, chose to become a human zygote, to become sin for us, to bear the scars of the cross for all of eternity. Now, remember, we've been talking about infinity and eternity and all that. So just think, from the date of the cross, for the rest of eternity, the rest of infinity, Jesus will bear the signs of the cross. He will bear those scars as a token to what happened. Okay? So we can live the life that we were created to live. Isn't that God awesome? I mean, look at what he's done, you know, and as we have looked out into our solar system and our universe, and we look at all that God has created, and yet he came down and became a human like you and I to save us. So and all we got to do is choose to do that. You know, that's the one thing that always gets me when I talk to people who really don't believe in God, is, you know, if you just understood what he's done for you, you know. But people don't want to know that. Our God is awesome. And there is an end game, okay? And I'm sure all of you know what it is that I'm going to read here. But you know, I just get a thrill up and down my spine every time I read these words, okay, about what God's end game is for us. You know, we talked a little bit in Sabbath school this morning about God's obligation to provide a safe universe, right? That's what God is. That's what he's working on right now. He's working on providing a safe universe, because at some point in time, all of this is going to come to a close. And God is going to separate the sheep from the goats, and sin and sinners and all of that's going to be done away with, and there will be no more of that in the universe. So here's God's end game. The great controversy is ended. Sin and sinners are no more. The entire universe is clean. One pulse of harmony and gladness beats throughout the vast creation. From him who created all flow life and light and gladness throughout the realms of illimitable space. There's the universe. From the minutest atom to the greatest world, all things animate and inanimate, in their unshadowed beauty and perfect joy, declare that God is love. And that's God's end game. Amen.